So after the presentation, we will be moving to the panel, which is comprised of the country director of the World Bank, a representative from the Ministry of Lands here in Tanzania, and a representative from the private sector. And so without further ado, I'd like to kick off the presentation and allow and introduce Edward Anderson, who will be presenting the first session on dealing with data, instrumentation and modeling of the Msimbazi River. Edward Anderson is a senior disaster risk management specialist based in Dar es Salaam. His focus largely is on the nexus of urbanization and climate risks and leveraging emerging and mobility technologies for greater resilience across Africa. So I'd like to very much welcome Edward to kick off this session, and thank you very much. I'll be sharing my screen.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'd like to start this storyline on the Msimbazi River in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, from the perspective of the data, because how do you manage what you do not measure, right? And hopefully what you will see on the next slide, or my cover slide, will be the lower basin of the Msimbazi River that bisects the sort of central business district of Dar es Salaam. And here you see highlighted the encroached buildings within the floodplain. So it's a very dynamic river affecting the heart of the central business district. Next, please. And what we have, which I think is quite common across any fast growing and largely unplanned city, and Dar es Salaam can be as much as 70 to 80% unplanned growth, is complete data gaps in the informal communities, and a lot of complexity involved in aligning different thematic data sets with different ages, fidelity, formats, metadata. So even if we can access data for free, there's a cost to consultants and time. And really what characterizes this project that takes it to another level is the complexity of climate risk requires us to work across many different thematic areas. And the speed of growth and the urgency of the problem also requires us to update this extremely quickly and ideally scale to other cities. So we've embedded an approach that prioritizes local and open data, local people, local devices, and low cost and low complexity methods and tools. Next, please. So you see typical risk evaluation characterizing the built environment. The exposure will collect building information, the features and uses of those buildings, drains, roads, community assets. And here in informal communities, we really leverage local students working with the community members themselves to digitize those assets, identify them. Next, please. So they are going out using the tool in their pocket, their mobile phone with Open Data Kit and simple devices like a ruler, in this case a trowel, and engaging in a form of sort of citizen science collection campaigns. So in this example, it's more environmental data, the surface soil map, working under the guidance of a traditional consultancy, JBA consultants, which were developing a geomorphological study and specifically a sedimentation and erosion model. We needed much higher resolution of soil samples, and using large numbers of students across the city, we could rapidly collect this. But this has been done, for example, for trees, for solid waste dumps, for a number of other sort of community assets in support of that environmental and hydrological model. Next, please. And I mentioned household surveys. This is also a more novel use of household flood histories to replace a lack of historical instrumentation in the river. So to use a flood model, we really need to calibrate it against major events. And here you see visualized 35,000 household surveys of flood incidences against known flood events or rainfall events. So this is very useful when we don't have any instruments, both for meteorology or hydrology in the river basin historically. Next. But we don't give up entirely on traditional instruments. We also try to lean on off-the-shelf, robust, low-cost devices. So you see in the bottom right here an example of a meteorological sensor that has no moving parts for rainfall, no rainfall bucket, no anemometer for wind. About 10% of the cost of traditional automatic weather stations, and augmented with environmental sensors like a web camera used in place of a radar camera to look at flood depths or flood flows in combination with machine learning image classification. So these have been spread out across the basin to support model calibration originally, but now can be used for environmental monitoring. Next, please. So you see a third-party application dashboard by Community Water Watch here that takes those data, they are open on an API, and is able to support a flood forecast model as well as situation awareness. When we have heavy rains, we can see which intersections are predicted to be flooded and for how long. And this is very exciting, and it's the first time we have this richness of data and this sort of real-time access to it. Next, please. But really to conclude, I mean, the core purpose of this sort of data effort was to support the flood mitigation interventions. And that is something that was designed with community members and stakeholders through a 9-month-long charrette process that you'll hear about shortly. But to inform that and to have these trade-off discussions between different stakeholder groups, you want to have a common and up-to-date model and a responsive model that you can ask questions of it. So on the left, you see the hydro meteorological scenarios, different flood levels for different interventions that people could pose. And on the center, you see more sociological information, like which houses will be flooded, who's willing to relocate in a different scenario, where are the major assets. And on the right, you can see some of the renderings from the artist of what the interventions could look like laid out on the special planning zone. So at the heart of these decisions is a common agreement of what the evidence is and what does it say with different scenarios. And being able to query it and get really quick responses was really essential, and that's why having local people and low complexity methods, I think, was key. So to walk you through the charrette, I'd like to introduce engineer Musa Nati. He's been with the World Bank team for almost 3 years now, and he was the lead facilitator on this program. But he was also a Kinondoni Municipal Council director and a town planner by training. So welcome, engineer Nati.
Thank you very much, Edward, for your session. I mean, I'm going to talk about people in partnership in the and the Msimbazi charrette. You know, it is very important that people participate in most of the decisions that we make. And this is the charrette was the first of its own kind in Tanzania. The complexity of the Msimbazi challenge include flood risk reduction, environmental rehabilitation of the river, city park development, and even building resilience communities. So another important contributing factor to the complexity is the number of stakeholders with different mandates within the basin itself. So, you know, we had local authorities, which are planning authorities with mandates on the provision of basic services. And we have the Wami Ruvu Basin, we have National Environmental Management Council, we have Ministry of Land, we have Tanzania Forest Service, we have TANROADS. All these have legal mandates on the basis. Other important stakeholders are the residents of the which stay and live in the valley. So it was therefore very important to find a unit of purpose around which the stakeholder can build a comprehensive multi-stakeholder solution in which all could commit. Next, please. We started this charrette, as I said, the first of its own in Tanzania. A charrette as a collaborative planning process that harnesses the talents and energies of all interested parties to create and support a master plan that represents transformative community change. And during this charrette, there is a method and main principle. And the most important principle is reframing. A reframing exercise made the participant aware of the fact that different people see different things, and that's one own point of view is not the only reality. This was a step toward appreciating the wisdom in views and the experiences of other members with different backgrounds in the group. Next, please. So with this collaboration, with 9 months of collaboration, 30 different sessions, 59 institutions that participated, 100 representatives, and more than 1,000 citizens that participated. We needed to work together toward the common goal of resilient community. Nobody should be blamed for what, and this is what we emphasize, that nobody should be blamed for what happened in the past. not the government and not the community. There are so many reasons, and developing resilient community is a complex task. For the government, is an option solution is not expensive one. But for the community, it is important to know whether they can stay in the neighborhood or they can go elsewhere. We needed also to know how many people are affected. We need to keep talking to search for solution. So this requires framing. The government needs to look at this more from the community's angle, and the community needed to accept more that the government tries to find good solution for the communities within the regulation that exists. Next, please. So this is the stakeholder of Msimbazi. All the stakeholders were on one platform discussing this, and we used very, very little time to come up with the comprehensive plan. Next, please. So this is part of the deliverable. Of course, two very important deliverables that we had a strategy and the management framework for flood protection in the environmental rehabilitation in the wider Msimbazi River. This is volume A. And also we had the detailed plan for the lower Msimbazi. And after finishing this, we do some interest. And now we have GIZ who are interested also to do the middle Msimbazi basin through another charrette. With this introduction of the charrette, I would like to welcome Mary Grace, who will be presenting riverfront development and regeneration opportunities. Mary Grace is an urban planning specialist supporting urban development and land administration projects in East Africa. She formerly worked as an urban analyst researching land tenure in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and as an urban development planner in local government in the United States of America. So please welcome Mary Grace to present riverfront development regeneration opportunities. Karibu.
Asante, Engineer Nati. The plan that was an output from the charrette process identifies a path forward with the primary goal of flood mitigation. The needed interventions will dramatically transform the landscape of the lower Msimbazi Basin, in turn generating opportunities for redevelopment. One of the key interventions is the development of a city park in areas which are low-lying and which will always be at risk of flooding, even after all possible flood mitigation measures are taken. Another key intervention is the construction of flood control terraces. The principle here is pretty simple. Dredging is required in order to widen and deepen the river channel. The sediment that is extracted would then be piled and leveled in order to create terraces. The lower and middle terraces are used as a city park during dry times, and they channel stormwater during and after heavy rains. The highest level of the terrace is designed to remain dry even during a 100-year flood event. So that top terrace essentially turns what was low-lying, flood-prone land into land that is safe from flooding and suitable for urban development. The reclaimed land is in a very prime area of the city. It's adjacent to the CBD, and it's also adjacent to what will become the Central City Park. So in the process of sorting out how to deal with the Msimbazi River as a flooding liability, the design charrette process identified a solution that doubles as an urban development opportunity. Speaking openly, the possibility of availing new land was something of a pleasant surprise that came through the process. It was not anticipated at the outset. It is exciting though, because it presents the Tanzanian government with an opportunity to recoup the costs of its investment in the engineering works and in the resettlement of vulnerable households. It also offers an opportunity for government to cross-subsidize in the further needed investments like the river management needs and the operation and maintenance costs, and then also the social needs and delivery of basic services. But the newly availed land also presents an opportunity to catalyze economic growth in Dar es Salaam's urban core. As always, public funds can only go so far, and unlocking the economic potential of this area requires sizable investment by the private sector, and they are interested in the business case. This called for a detailed market study to thoroughly evaluate the profit potential of redevelopment, especially real estate investments. The findings of that study project solid returns on an investment over a 20-year period. One of the key findings of the market analysis was that a phased approach will be important in order to give the market time to absorb new supply. The market study has also helped to begin answering the question of investment in what? Essentially, what is the highest and best use of newly available land? The proportion of land that would be needed for public infrastructure and amenities was determined to be about 1/3 of the total land area. Further market analysis found that mixed residential and commercial development is most feasible, more so than office. The type of residential development has been and continues to be a key focus area. The majority of Dar es Salaam's residents, and especially the people who live in the unplanned settlements that surround the Msimbazi Basin, are low income. And so the inclusion of affordable housing is an important priority. It is also clear that the financing of affordable housing will require subsidy. Well, the business case to investors depends on good returns from market rate housing. And so mixed income housing is therefore most appropriate. And how to deliver this in the existing institutional context is the key focus of discussions as we move ahead. The core consideration of any redevelopment initiative should be people, inclusive of and with special emphasis on the people who are present in the area currently. So from Msimbazi, there's first the immediate question of how people living in the most flood-prone areas can be resettled in a way that suits their needs and does not leave them worse off economically. There's also the question of to where. About 1/3 of the households reported during the charrette process that they would prefer an option that allows them to stay in the same subward where they live now, while others prefer to relocate elsewhere. And the task at hand now is to identify exactly what modalities there will be for the modalities for delivering on that will be. There's also the longer term question of what can be done and how to ensure that urban development is actually inclusive and not only serving higher income people, but also the urban poor who are by far the majority. The economic and social issues I have touched on all relate to the broader issue of sustainability. Environment, of course, is a critical piece of the sustainability puzzle. And so I'd like to now welcome our colleague, Larissa Duma, who has supported a broad range of work relating to erosion, sedimentation, and reforestation, and who will delve into the many complex environmental issues that factor into the Msimbazi equation. Thank you and welcome, Larissa.
Thank you, Mary Grace, for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. So I'm here today to present really briefly on a snapshot of some of the environment and ecological issues that surround the Msimbazi Basin, with a specific focus on erosion, river sedimentation, and urban mangroves. Next slide. So the center diagram that you see here is actually showing the entire Msimbazi River catchment, which in the upstream part of the catchment is really characterized by like lush tropical forests. However, as we know, in any urban spaces, this naturally tends to degrade over time. So as you move downstream towards the city center, you'll notice sand mining taking place. You'll notice houses encroaching upon the core river channel as well as its tributaries. You'll also notice that in the lowest parts of the basin, closer to the CBD, you'll see critical infrastructure such as, unfortunately, the bus rapid transit system, as well as the Jangwani Bridge, sitting directly within the floodplain area, both experiencing flooding challenges that have been mentioned in previous presentations. Whereas the very last tip of the entire basin is actually an urban mangrove forest. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what you'll notice here is that as we all know, rivers like naturally meander and change over time. However, the Msimbazi River in particular has been having changes happen quite rapidly. So on the left-hand column, you'll see for Pugu Hills in the upstream catchment area, from 2013 to 2017 alone, the river has dynamically changed. In the bottom 2017 image, you'll notice a big pile of white sediment there, which made the entire river take almost a U-turn. And in the images on the right from 2005 to 2018, you'll notice that almost on an annual basis after 2013, the river itself has dredged a new channel has disappeared, the river has meandered, several threads have been created, and this is happening at quite a rapid rate. Next slide. So as Edward had mentioned before, in order to understand some of these dynamics, we've conducted a geomorphology assessment, we've conducted several hydrological assessments to try to better understand what's really causing the flooding and how can we work around it or prevent it or mitigate it. So the figure on the far left is showing the entire basin once again, where you'll notice 6 distinct areas of high and very high erosion susceptibility, primarily in the upper catchment areas, which are areas where people are actually moving in the fastest at this moment. Whereas the image on the far right is actually a zoomed in snapshot of the lower basin, which distinctly shows the blue area where deposition potential is. So typically sediment is eroding upstream and downstream is depositing. So what does this look like in pictures? Next slide. So the image on the far left, this is the upstream part of the catchment. You'll notice that there's some sand mining actually taking place within the riverbed. You'll also notice that the riverbanks are quite eroded, and there's also some rocks that are being collected in this area. And you can imagine that during a rainfall event, this all would move. The image in the center here is several houses that have kind of been along the tributary actually and ring riverbeds that see these big piles of sediment building up next to it. So obviously the sediment from upstream moving to this location. Now on the far right, what you'll notice is the actual BRT depot and a big pile of sediment that was actually being excavated to prevent the flooding we see in the final image here. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what does this mean for the mangroves? So unfortunately, since 2014 alone, we've witnessed about a 16-hectare dieback in the upstream part of the mangrove catchment. And this has been primarily caused to the flood events for 2 reasons. So the image in the top left corner actually shows us the mangrove tree with a series of sediment that has actually built up against the root system, asphyxiating it and unfortunately causing it to die. Whereas the image in the bottom left is an image of a mangrove tree, which unfortunately has been inundated by solid waste through different flooding events. And it was determined that during massive flood events, when the river is flowing through, this actually causes the trees to topple over. Next slide. So with all of this said and done, fortunately, there's quite a bit of opportunity for restoration. So the lowest parts of the mangrove forest closest to the ocean actually show a high amount of gastropods, which are snails, as well as crabs, which shows a lot of ecosystem health. Fortunately, also, we saw a lot of mangrove seedlings, and we also observed several different mangrove tree species in the lower portion of the mangrove, showing that that part is quite a healthy ecosystem. So with this, as you can see, the Msimbazi Basin faces a multifaceted set of issues, but there's still opportunities for its restoration and for us to find some sort of balance between complex human and nature interactions. So with this, I would like to thank everyone, and I would like to introduce you to our next presenter. So my colleague Chris Morgan will present Communicating Complexity, Creating a Virtual Reality Experience of the Msimbazi Opportunity Plan. Chris is a documentary filmmaker and photographer with a particular interest in urban resilience and smart cities. And since 2015, he has been working with the World Bank in Tanzania as a senior digital engagement specialist. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Larissa. Well, in true communication style, I'm going to speak very briefly and then show you a short film. So I'm going to be talking about communicating complexity. And it's, as Larissa said, how we created a virtual reality experience of the Msimbazi Opportunity Plan. Next slide, please. So as engineer Natty talked about, the charrette process was this wonderful collaborative design process that came up with the Msimbazi Opportunity Plan. What we looked at then is how did we take on the spirit of collaborative design, and how did we build consensus from stakeholders, people who lived in the affected communities, to the Tanzanian government, to partners in the redevelopment program. And we looked at a number of options, and we began to look at virtual reality. And this was taking a headset, something like this. This is the Oculus, and building an experience that would allow viewers to firstly witness the risks, to understand the risks, to envisage solutions, and also to play a role where they could actually interact with the different interventions and see the impact on the flood levels. So if we go to the next slide, you can watch a short film about this process.
When the floodings occur, we are being affected in many ways. First, our health. This water is polluted. Also, it spoils our homes, and the children, they don't go to school because their uniforms, their books, all are being spoiled.
The poor people that live within the Msimbazi Valley are the ones who are most vulnerable.
The floods that impact the city on a routine basis cost hundreds of millions of US dollars to the government of Tanzania and to the people that live here. The Msimbazi Opportunity Plan requires environmental measures, it requires social measures, it requires infrastructure measures. And to explain that to people that either are not familiar with the specific area of the city or to those that don't live in Dar es Salaam has been complex and challenging. The use of virtual reality seemed like an appropriate tool in this sense in order to allow people to really visualize what life is like today in the lower basin, what the project would bring through its phases of construction, and then what the future of the downtown core would look like once the project is complete.
We've built a virtual reality experience of the Msimbazi Opportunity Plan. This allows the viewer to actually see real 360-degree footage of flood events. It allows them to envisage the infrastructure improvements that will be made in the valley, and it allows them to change flood levels and actually see the impact of the infrastructure changes on the flood levels.
So when I put it on, you're right in the middle of the Msimbazi River. I was like, whoa, this is incredible. You know, I felt like I was right there. Felt like that my feet were going to get wet. To envision a solution, I think, is something that is not so clear and apparent. And the VR experience really helps you see as a decision maker where this area could go. So I could see that this is really going to be the next frontier in terms of digital technology and our use for communications and understanding the world.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the detail. I'll also post a high resolution link to that video. Obviously, we're constrained by the bandwidth, but in the chat box, I'll put a high resolution link if anyone wants to have a look. But this is obviously a new technology, and particularly for communicating resilience and risk, we were exploring different options. So what we did is we created a tour. We've done this 360 table, which you see in the top middle section photograph there. And then we envisaged 4 stages of development. So for example, top right is stage 4 of development. And then the viewer can actually click through 4 different flood levels and look at those 4, one in 10-year flood, one in a 100-year flood, one in a 1,000-year flood, and actually see the impact both on the community and on the infrastructure. We combined this with real 360-degree footage of actual flood events. So you'll see the middle left image is of an Insta360 Pro camera catching a flood event, filming a flood event in 8K at Jangwani Bridge. So we have, you can click to hotspots on the 360 table and then view these 360 images of the flood events. We combine that lastly with, as the bottom image, 360-degree artist renders of what the interventions could ultimately lead to. And this, to link back to what Larissa was talking about, is mangrove, rehabilitated mangrove. in a mixed use residential commercial setting. Next slide, please. And lastly, just to talk about future applications, and as I said, this is very new and something we're exploring. We are already using it both within the affected communities and within government circles in Tanzania, and our partners in the World Bank and other organizations. Ways we could improve this is, what if we could get the real-time meteorological data into the headset, so one could see those interventions, real-time mobility data from cell phones. So there are all sorts of exciting applications that we're looking towards. So I'm going to finish there and hand back to Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edward, Engineer Nazi, Mary Grace, Larissa, and Chris. Again, for all the participants who have connected, this is a snapshot of the various work streams that have been undertaken over the last number of years, and there is a wealth of information that underpins each one of those discussions that have been led by the team. So please do get in touch if you're interested in any specific area of it. We are very fortunate to have a wonderfully diverse and experienced panel with us today. We've got Mara Warwick, the country director for Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe from the World Bank. Sebastian Dietzel, the Chief Executive Officer of CPS Limited Tanzania, and Grace Mbena, who is a Senior Urban Planner now with the Ministry of Lands, Housing, and Human Settlements, who is responsible for the Dar es Salaam zone. So we're very much looking forward to welcoming them. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen and invite our government representative, Grace Mbena, to be our first panelist. Again, in this spirit of Ignite, we've asked the panelists to give their views within a 5-minute period. And so, Grace, Karibu, and we've worked together in the past, and I'm aware that you spent many years working at the Dar City Council, working on issues around urban planning. Now, the presentations that we've had today focused on the transformation of very valuable and centrally located land in the heart of the downtown core of Dar es Salaam. And there's an opportunity there for development. But my question that I'd like to hear from you, Grace Mbena, is how do we ensure that this project brings about a wider benefit to the residents of Dar es Salaam and is not only benefiting the real estate development and the private sector? So Grace, karibu.
Okay, thank you. Msimbazi Opportunity Project, we are depending much interest to urban communities, mostly in Dar es Salaam, because the project will add value along the project area, Msimbazi, and the adjacent areas, because the areas fall close to city center. On top of that, the project will transform land. As you will see, Msimbazi is a flood-prone area. So the project will transform the land from flood-prone area to land of opportunities. From that, we'll add a lot of benefits to urban communities, mostly in livelihood, improvement, government revenues, improvement in urban mobilities. So we have a lot of challenges. So implementation of this project will add more advantage to urban communities in Dar es Salaam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, for that. I think you're pointing out an important aspect, that it's not just the land itself that was highlighted, the 57 hectares, but indeed the adjacent land and the connections between the areas of the city that is critical to consider. Maybe I can take advantage of an extra minute or two that you have remaining to get a reaction from you on the virtual reality that Chris Morgan presented on, and just to hear your views on how that might be used in order to communicate urban planning projects and urban resilience projects. Thank you. Back to you.
Oh, thank you. having this project will act as a catalyst in other planning projects. Like we have a general planning scheme as a master plan. From experience of Charlotte, we've incorporated this project, and we had another view on how to manage rivers and stream in Dar es Salaam, because we have some cases in the other rivers and stream, so we have some plan regarding to this. On top of that, implementation of Msimbazi project will lead to redevelopment plan in enabling urban communities and the peripheral areas. So we'll have attaining resilient cities in Dar es Salaam from study we had as in Msimbazi opportunity plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. I think that point that you're making about the replication effect that this approach could take on other urban rivers in Dar es Salaam, and indeed on other rivers and cities in Tanzania, I think is critical. Allow me to invite Mara Warwick, our country director for the World Bank, to come in on this. We're very lucky, as Mara has a background in environmental engineering and expertise in flood management, urban development, urban environmental services, and also disaster risk management. So the issues that we've been discussing here, I think are quite close to Mara's heart. And I'm wondering, Mara, with your global experience, what do you see as being the greatest challenge of undertaking this type of integrated urban development and resilience project that is being proposed for the Msimbazi Basin? And in that regard also, what do you see as the potential role that the World Bank Group could more broadly take in order to facilitate the investment climate that's really needed to bring the private sector and the government together in order to reap these opportunities that have been presented? Mara, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation to join. As Eric said, I do coincidentally happen to be technically trained in this area and have worked on these kinds of projects around the world in various countries. And I think when I understand what work is being done here in Dar es Salaam, I can see a lot of similarities with the challenges and with the issues as we see in many other countries. I've worked on very similar kinds of projects in Istanbul and Manila and several cities in China, as well as here in Dar es Salaam. And when you ask the question, what are the greatest challenges? I think, looking at that broad experience around the world, what I would say is that there are several things that are often make it quite difficult for cities to tackle these kinds of challenges. I think the first and foremost is that they're very complex challenges, and they're often very expensive to resolve them. So for cities in the developing world, this can be a really very significant investment for the city or for the country. And in particular, I think because what we see is that these issues are often worse in environments that are, or in cities that are rapidly urbanizing, where there is a lot of encroachment onto the river systems. And that encroachment tends to be the poorer people of the city, because of course, this is the only land that is available to them, or they feel is available. It's made a lot worse, of course, in places where there is limited planning or urban planning or urban controls. And so I think one of the challenges that we see is that cities are often, chasing their tail, so to speak. They're making progress, but the problem is catching up with them every day that they make progress. So trying to find a solution that is sustainable and holistic for the city as a whole is often very challenging. I think the other thing, and this was highlighted quite well in these presentations, is that the solutions are very often, or the problems are very often not localized problems. They're whole catchment problems. In the developing countries, it's often very difficult to tackle those problems on a catchment-wide basis. Again, because of money, but also because these can be very complex issues and require complex solutions. In Metro Manila, for example, where flooding is very, very intense, ultimately the solution requires the construction of a large dam system in the upstream catchment. And that can be a very challenging and very big investment in a developing country. So first and foremost, I think the complexity makes these things and the speed with which urbanization occur makes these problems quite complex. Second of all, I think, again, the presentations, I'm essentially bringing together a few threads that I saw in the presentations. I think second of all, these are not engineering projects. And if we consider them to be engineering projects alone, then we really miss the point. And we also miss most of the solution. These are socioeconomic projects. These are projects that have an infrastructure component, but also very much have a component related to society and, of course, environment as well. And I think it can be challenging to bring a level of understanding amongst all stakeholders of the holistic nature of this kind of issue and the holistic need in the solution. This, I must say, there's been a lot of progress on this aspect here in Dar es Salaam, and I think Dar es Salaam now is very well set up to be able to implement a holistic solution because of all of this groundwork that's been done. But we can see that it's taken several years for this level of understanding to be built from the bottom up. And so, but that's a very important aspect. Third, I want to highlight that I think it's very important and often a challenge to make sure that all stakeholders understand their role. What is the role of government in a project like this? What is the role of the private sector? And what is the role of society and community? And making sure that each of these actors is in a position to be able to carry out their function well, understands it and carries it out well is also often a challenge. I think for government, it's very important for government to recognize their role in the public sector, not as a private sector developer, but as a facilitator, an enabler of the private sector. But also they play a very important role in terms of safeguarding their community, providing the infrastructure and the work that needs to be done to safeguard and to provide safety to the citizens, to protect their own infrastructure that they have built, but also to protect the environment and enhance urban livability. Again, these are very much themes that we saw in the presentation, and I think these are aspects that government is very much needs to be firmly in the lead to endorse that in any project such as this, there needs to be investments to enhance urban livability and to protect the environment. And of course, goes without saying that government has a very important role to safeguard those who are going to be displaced by projects such as this. And also, and I think important to mention, those who may lose out through a gentrification process that can occur as the land value increases after the project is implemented. So I think you also mentioned about private sector. So we're going to hear from the private sector, and I think private sector is much better to speak about private sector than me. But what I would say is that the World Bank Group, from our perspective, it is important that we look at this from a holistic perspective. As I said, our philosophy is that projects such as this should be government enabled and private sector led. So the question is, what does the private sector need to be able to enter effectively and make the most efficient use of the increased land value that can be generated from projects like this, but in a safe, sustainable and fair way. So this requires government to regulate, it requires government to enable, but it requires also the private sector to be willing to come in. And I think that it's important for us to listen to the private sector and see what else is needed to be able to facilitate their entry, and that what more can government do to facilitate their entry and to make best use of the benefits of a project such as this. Let me stop there. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was absolutely spot on, I think, in terms of your understanding about the corrective development that seems to be often the driver rather than having proactive integrated solutions. And I think that the observation around the catchment-wide impact and what happens upstream, affecting the downstream is critical. And I particularly appreciated the point that this is not just an engineering project. But I think the last points that you were making leads us very well to Sebastian. Sebastian, you are the CEO and the managing director of a private sector real estate company, and your company is developing housing options both here in Dar es Salaam, but also in Zanzibar, with Fumba Town, which has received accolades here in the country. And the real estate potential that the Msimbazi is putting on the table shows a requirement for, as Mary Grace was saying, affordable housing, but also mid-range housing, high-end units, commercial, food and beverage options. And so I'm wondering, as Mara was just asking, what will it take to bring the private sector to the table in order to partner with the government, in order to really bring this to fruition? Over to you, Sebastian. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, Ms. Warwick. Yes, I think this is an exciting opportunity for the private sector, to be very honest. And a lot of the groundwork that needs to be done has been done here already. And I'm very excited. I followed this project for quite a while already. And I'm excited to be part of this and potentially be part of this. Actually, I have to say the private sector doesn't need actually so much to get involved here. A lot of things have been done from an institutional point. I feel, and that I fully agree with also Engineer Nati and what Ms. Warwick was saying. I think it's very important that we create a willingness to be really inclusive. We need inclusive developments. We have currently 3,300 households living in that floodplain in this area. We heard that 1/3 would like to remain. So I think we have to make a very good plan how to keep as many of them as possible in the area and include them in the development. And this is absolutely possible. Because the challenge for these people will be if we resettle them in one area or the other, they're going to be far away from where the jobs are today. And we know that big cities like Dar es Salaam have a major challenge in urban and infrastructure development. So people, if the further we move them away from the jobs, the harder it will be for them to actually get a job or make an income for the family. So I feel we should really include them. This is a development of 57 hectares in the center of Dar. It should give enough space in development to really include the low income sector as well as the middle and upper income sector. So I think this willingness of inclusiveness is very important. We are showing that at the moment in Zanzibar that it's absolutely possible to include everybody into an urban development here. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have, but it's a great opportunity. And because in the end, we have to create a community there. And these people are already the community at the moment, and they have to be included and they have to be listened to. And like Engineer Nettie said before, it's very important for them to understand and know what's coming. I'm sure that many are actually afraid when this project will kick off that they don't know really what is coming. So we need to talk to them, and that has been done. And we have to include them in the project. Yeah, and we're looking there, especially at models that have been done in Singapore, where you have in high rises, you have lower income levels, and then the further you go up, you have the higher income. This is absolutely possible and has been practiced in many areas, especially who are very densely built, like for instance, Singapore, and there are things we can look at, and they are also feasible. I know that's been done in Istanbul as well, where the houses have been demolished and these people have been given a certain space and in the newly developed high rises. So these things are possible. It's a matter of calculating it right. From a political point of view, I think we are very well set in Tanzania. We have stability around. Of course, we haven't had the experience on a strong enabling environment. From a technical political point for large-scale real estate developments, this is a lot about speed. This is a lot about processes. There's a lot about cooperation and working together with government offices in a very efficient and performant manner. This is important. Of course, the affordability of that land, taxes and fees, but also what would be really amazing here, and this is something I would like to lobby on a political point when we start or when this project starts, that we have a scheme for social housing that has to be more politically motivated. which is also very good. Like in other places in the world where government gives guarantees for social housing, for instance, and the private sector builds them, and then is capped with rents for a certain amount of years. There are different models that will really enable a lot of social housing to be implemented in this project. Especially for those families who otherwise could be resettled or they couldn't stay in one way or the other. But I think this is absolutely possible to do, and a great way to start some social housing projects in Tanzania. Then, of course, the stability all around it. This is a long-term project. I've seen the presentation before. I think estimation of around 25 years. So for private sector to enter a long-term commitment like this, or even phases, we need stability. And but that is something that we have in Tanzania. We feel very safe here in doing business, and so I don't see there any great challenges. It is actually a fantastic opportunity. From a technical point, Eric, I would say this is the most important is really a very established land use plan for this area that can be done in hand and in a development from between urban planning of Tanzania, World Bank, and maybe also private sector to make it feasible in the end to develop this land. But also to have a good land plan that everybody is following, and that has to be followed by everybody who gets involved in developing this area in one way or the other. And of course, we have to make a plan of how to implement infrastructure. Of course, it's great, and private developers always love the infrastructure to be done by the government or somebody else, but it is actually possible to also include that in our calculations if we have the right quantity of land or development space to be done. Our current project in Zanzibar, we are building the entire infrastructure and can still sell in an affordable manner units there. So it is possible, but it has to be discussed, and there needs to be a good plan, a land use plan, and of course a very good plan for the infrastructure and how to connect this area also to the other existing urban settlements and areas in Dar es Salaam. And I know in terms of infrastructure, we have already a lot of challenges. So this has to be looked at very carefully, always when it comes to sewer and other issues and water supply, of course. Yes, so that is basically, I think there's there's going to be a lot of interest from private sector when this project comes to life. And I can see a lot of developers being interested to be part of this. I think this is a fantastic opportunity, 57 hectares in the center of Dar es Salaam. Yes, we are excited, and well, our company would love to be part of this, and also see this as a great opportunity for this town to further densify, which is also important for Dar es Salaam. We have a lot of low rises in Dar es Salaam, and the more we increase density, the less infrastructure we need. And so a project like this in the heart of Dar is a fantastic opportunity also for the private sector.
Great. Thank you very much, Sebastian, for that. I think the points that you've made are absolutely spot on as well. And I can see that there's a lot of convergence come from the different perspectives, from the government, from the development partners, and indeed from the private sector. And that is exactly what we need in terms of a tripartite approach to this, to get the coalition of the willing to the table, to tackle, as Mara said, a very, very complex multi-sectoral challenge. So unfortunately, we are participants out of time, and I'm getting messages reminding that Understanding Risk 2020 is now moving to its closing ceremony. So I would like to firstly thank our panelists. Mara Warwick, thank you very much, Country Director of the World Bank, Grayson Bena, Senior Urban Planner with the Ministry of Lands, and Sebastian Diesvold, CEO and Managing Director of CPS Limited Tanzania, for your observations and your interventions on this session, not least also to our speakers. And indeed everyone who is connected for this session from around the globe. Unfortunately, we have limited time, and we would love to take questions, so please do get in touch with us. We've taken note of those that have been put into the chat and can be reached to take those questions up. So thank you all very much. I hope that Understanding Risk 2020 has been a success. Everyone stay safe and healthy. All the best. Have a good day, evening, and afternoon. Goodbye.